Okay, we are live on YouTube.
Hi everyone, we will begin the session in next 2 minutes. All right. Hi everyone. A very good afternoon to all of you. I am Ankita from NASSCOM and I'm back with another interesting episode from our product management series. We have a special guest from a different industry who will share his knowledge and experience on winning at moments of truth to deliver consumer delight. I welcome Mainak Dhar, author and CEO for India and South Asia at Kimberly Clark. I'm sure the flavors he will add will help us attain a wider perspective in terms of a happy and elated consumer. You can ask questions anytime during the session. Manak will cater to them post his presentation. And also, please do not forget to leave your feedback to help me better my future episodes. Again, welcome, Manak, and over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ankita, and good afternoon, everyone. So, thanks everyone for making the time to be part of this session. To be absolutely honest, when I was first asked to come and speak to all of you, I kind of thought, look, what am I going to talk to all of you about? As a very wise man long ago called Socrates said, wisdom is knowing what you don't know. So when I was told you'll be speaking to a bunch of people who are largely in the technology space and product management, I said, look, I have never worked in the technology space, so I clearly don't know a lot about what you do. At the same time, another wise man said, everyone you will meet knows something you don't. So sometimes I think we learn the most when we actually engage with people from very different backgrounds with very diverse experiences. So I'll try and share some of my thoughts, and really what I'll share, the context for my sharing is really, as Ankita alluded, there are two parts to my life. I have now spent almost 25 years in the corporate sector. Started my career with Procter and Gamble, spent almost 18 years there, 3 years in India, 15 years abroad, then worked in General Mills for about 6 years, and most recently have joined Kimberly Clark. So almost 25 years working in organizations whose basic raison d'etre is winning with consumers. I mean, that's pretty much what we live and breathe every day. I guess the other part of my life is I like telling stories. So, as Ankita mentioned, I am a writer. Writing has been a passion of mine ever since I was a child, and I've been lucky to be able to follow that passion along with my corporate career. And so I don't have a lot of theories or constructs or theoretical knowledge to offer. I don't claim to be an expert on anything. But what I thought I'd do today is talk you through some frameworks and mindsets I have learned through my career in what does it take to delight consumers beyond just the product you make, and illustrate that through some stories, real stories that I have encountered through my career, so that hopefully some of them resonate with you, even if they're not exactly applicable to what you do and the content of your business. Maybe there are some principles you take away that strike a chord. So moving to the next portion, all these years that I've worked, I thought before we get into any specifics, what are some broad mindsets? Because before we start talking any frameworks, I think it's important to talk about mindsets that go into truly delighting consumers. So, in whatever industry you're fundamentally making something or providing something. It's a product, either a tangible product or a service or a software, whatever it is, you're making something to be used by an end user. And there are three things I feel that are important mindsets which I have learned. The first is see the world through your consumer's eyes, not your own. I think one of the most common biases people might have when they're working on any business or any product or services, they assume their consumer is like them. And one of the things I've learned very early on in my career, which is still an important part of success in my industry, is understand how your consumer views life. So, I'll tell you a story from the time when I just began working. I started my career with Procter and Gamble. I was working on hair care. We had just launched Pantene shampoo in India. So if you think of it, our target consumer was women with long hair who are hair involved, who are worried about damage and hair health, and who go to salons. And I was a 21, 22-year-old young man whose idea of going to a salon was the neighborhood barber who had never really thought too much about the shampoo he was using, and whose hair was probably a little bit shorter than it is now. So I said, look, how am I actually, I can go through the motions of working on this and selling a product called a shampoo. I said, look, but if I really want to understand what's going through the consumer's mind, how do I go about doing it? So I started doing something which seemed crazy at the time, but it taught me a lot. Outside of work, I obviously didn't do it in office, but outside of work, at home, in the evenings, when I was hanging out, I actually bought a cap which had a long wig attached. It actually looked something like this. This obviously isn't the same wig. It's almost 25 years now. And I used to wear it to just say, what happens when you have long hair? What are the issues that you face? And that opened my eyes in many ways, because if I had just looked at it through my lens, I would probably never have had the empathy of what does somebody with long hair actually experience and what are they seeking when they're looking at buying this product. So that's the first story I'll share. In whatever context you're in, whatever industry you're in, ask yourself, how is my consumer different from me? How do I put myself into his or her shoes? The second learning is it's not what you put in the product, but what the consumer gets out of it that matters. Again, it's not specific to any industry. Um, Sometimes the focus is what am I putting in the product? I'd say flip it on its head and what is it that the consumer gets out? So I've put an example on the screen. On the left-hand side is something that is sold by General Mills in the US and many other countries, a product called Fiber One, which is really positioned as high fiber, low calories. So you can see 90 calories, 20% fiber. In India and some other emerging markets, the similar chassis, not exactly the same product, very similar chassis, was marketed towards families as a delicious snack. And because what we found is the basic idea of something with chocolate on top, with chips in between, a soft texture, actually delighted consumers around the world. In the US, what people were seeking from a snack was something different from what they were seeking in India. So, how do you amplify features your product has, knowing what your consumer wants, versus this is my product, it's a one trick pony, I just have to sell the product I have? That's the second learning. The third mindset I'd say is, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what business you're in, magic happens when you go beyond what consumers say to truly understand why. So, one of the brands I worked on in my career was Vicks. I'd hazard a guess that probably every one of you on the call has used Vicks at some point of time in your life. And what the Vicks team and we figured out is the magic is not just the product. The magic is the memories of your mother putting Vicks on you when you were unwell, when you were a child. I know that's true for me. That's true for many, many consumers. So it's not just the claim, it's not the product. So which is why in all Vicks communication, you will see the mother's hand and the mother's role. When that was not there, consumers did not resonate with the brand as much. So the product is the same, and Vicks is a beautiful example. The product on Vicks Vapor Rub has not been changed for decades. But it's really understanding why is it that the consumer values it beyond just the product feature. So I'll now get to the framework which I wanted to chat a bit about is, what are these moments of truth? So you have a product, maybe it's a wonderful product, maybe it's a far superior product in your testing versus what your other competitors have, but how do you actually translate that into consumer delight? And one of the frameworks which I'll chat about is what's known as the moments of truth. So if I look at a fairy tale of how consumers experience products, and my son is in class 7, and I think a couple of years ago in school, they started teaching them about economics and demand and supply, and it's a fairly simplistic view of how people think this works, which is somebody produces something. Let's say you're producing cookies, so you see all these cookies coming out of a production line. You distribute it, the consumer picks it up, the consumer tastes it, consumer loves it, and you have a happy family and they keep repeating it. That is a fairy tale because it assumes that all you need to do is make a great product and somehow the consumer will taste it and it's going to be delight the consumer. The reality of how it works, and this obviously is different in different industries. So I'm speaking from my experience in fast moving consumer goods. The reality of how it works is, the first barrier is, are your consumers even aware of you? So I've put a number there of 70%. Honestly, most FMCG brands would be lucky to have a top of mind awareness of 70%. And I think it's true whether you're marketing a service, a software product, you may have an amazing product. How many of your target consumers are even aware of you? So that's the first barrier. Then how many are actually trying you? Not everyone who's aware of you is going to try you. Then how many actually repeat you once they try you? And these numbers are kind of showing a narrowing funnel, which is fairly typical of consumer products, which is at the end of it, even if you're a pretty well-developed brand in many competitive categories, you may actually end up with around 20 to 25% of loyal consumers. So that, I think, is the fundamental shift on, look, it's not just about making a great product and assuming consumers will try you and reward you for it. And how that works is really a framework which I'll talk about, which is the moments of truth. I'll walk through this in a couple of seconds, and then I'll give you some examples on each of them to bring them to life. So the first moment of truth, which many of you might have heard of or read about, is really when the consumer or your customer is coming face to face with your brand or product for the first time and making a choice of, do I buy this or not? In an FMCG environment, it can be the shelf in a store, it can be when they're browsing on Amazon or Flipkart or Big Basket to see whether they buy your brand or not. In a B2B context, it could be when your rep has gone and is meeting the customer and they're actually getting an exposure to your product and your offerings for the first time. That's a really important moment of truth. The second moment of truth is what happens after they've actually tried it, after they've actually decided to give you a go. Maybe they've placed an initial order, maybe it's a consumer who's actually bought a pack of your cookies. What happens after they try you? Does your product deliver on the expectations they had or not? The third moment of truth, which in the old days when I began my career was called word of mouth. Today, most people are putting things on social media if they're consumers, or they're talking about it in their industry. If you're talking about a B2B product, it is once your consumer has tried your product, what are they actually saying about it to others, which can influence others beyond themselves. What Google introduced a few years ago is a concept of a zero moment of truth, which is in a highly connected and networked world we live in today, most consumers aren't actually waiting for you to show up or for her to encounter you in store. When they have a need, often what they're doing is they're researching. So they might Google, or they might look up an industry journal if they're a B2B customer, or they might ask somebody in an industry association if they're a B2B customer. They're starting to form impressions of your product even before your product has actually got a chance to be presented to them. So that's the 4 moments of truth that kind of explain why it's not as simple as I make a product and it's the best product and the consumer tries it and is delighted. I'll talk about each of these moments of truth and say, look, how do these play into how your consumer perceives your product, what you make in the first place to really delight your consumers, and how can you shape some of these moments of truth to your advantage. So let me start with the first moment of truth. You know, the whole cliche, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And I think the first moment of truth, the basic point is, are you even clear about what your product's first moment of truth is? Sometimes, people are so focused on the product that they may not even fully appreciate what is that first moment of truth where you might actually be losing out or where you can actually get a significant win. Second is, do you know what your consumer is seeking at that first moment of truth? And the final piece I'll talk about is, in the FMCG industry, we always talk about this concept of stop, hold, and close, which is at the first moment of truth, are you giving your consumer a reason to stop and notice you? Are you then engaging them, and then are you closing the sale? To be honest, it's not very different from a B2B industry. So in my career, while I worked in FMCG, often I've managed businesses which had a B2B component, for example, a bakery sales business at General Mills. It's not very dissimilar. Your rep goes to a bakery to make a pitch for products you have. They need to have some reason to even stop, all the stuff they're doing, they're busy with, and even listen to you. You need to have a compelling reason on why you will hold their attention. And finally, how are you going to close it? So the principles are broadly transferable, but I think the biggest thing is really understanding that first moment of truth. So as I said, I'll be doing this less through theory, more through storytelling, and hopefully some of those principles will come to life for you. So, one story I'll tell is about, again, back to hair care. This is a different assignment. I was based in Singapore as a regional marketing leader on Pantene. Pantene is the number one hair care brand in many, many markets. We had exceptional quality products. So, we had amazing world-class products. We started as a shampoo brand, but, as we started growing the category, we had this amazing treatment product, which, all our scientists told us was pretty much as good as many of the products used in many high-end salons. So that was very exciting that, look, we have this product which offers a phenomenal level of performance. How do we get this in front of our consumers? So I was a marketing director at the time. And one of the dilemmas was this category was never really taking off in many, many countries. So when we dug deep into it and we placed the product with consumers, they came back and told us, look, the product is great, but you know what? It just feels like any other Pantene I've used before. It's like any normal conditioner I pick up at the supermarket. And the basic reason was the packaging we were selling it in looked exactly like everything we'd been selling before. So the product inside was amazing. However, the consumer's impression at the first moment of truth was so conditioning them to think of this is the same old stuff. A, why am I being asked to pay more for it? B, it cannot be special because fundamentally you're putting me in a frame of mind where this looks, feels like exactly stuff I've used before. The change we made is we went back and understood from them what forms your impression of the quality of the product inside, if you're talking salon quality products. And they said, look, salon quality products don't show up in mass packaging like this. They look premium. They have these small ampules. So we actually then changed to this packaging, which you see on the screen in front of you, actually inspired by stuff we saw in salons. The same treatment product, branded it as Pantene 3-Minute Miracle Treatment. That became a huge success for us. And what unlocked that success was really understanding what is that first moment of truth for consumers. You may have an amazing product, but if you're failing at that first moment of truth, consumer may not even experience a product or experience it with the right frame of mind. Second example, very different context. At a point in time in my career, I was working on Vicks, and this is a story from Vicks in Australia. We had Vicks Vapor Rub and other products which were very much OTC products. Consumers would pick them up like FMCG brands. We started expanding our portfolio into a number of new categories like cold and flu and other products, which really started getting more medicinal. And one of the things we found was the consumer trusted Vicks as a brand. Vicks was one of the most trusted brands in the category. However, in these categories, the first moment of truth was not the packaging. It was not the advertising. It was when somebody in your family has a cold and flu, you're not going to buy a brand just because the advertising is good. The first moment of truth became a gentleman or a lady at the chemist shop and we all know it as consumers, where people would go and ask, my child has cold, what product should I use? And we realized that our products were great, but we really needed to change our go-to-market in terms of really winning with these pharmacists and chemists. And that was a big area we invested in, because P&G historically was very much, an FMCG company. We said to actually win in these new categories, we needed to significantly improve our ability to win with chemists. So two very different examples, were both saying you may have amazing products, but understanding what that first moment of truth is for your consumer can really determine whether they even try you or not, and secondly, what expectations you're setting for them. Now, coming to the second moment of truth, on the face of it, it sounds simple. Second moment of truth is the product. People try your product and it's great. As William Shakespeare said, which I have the quote up there, is expectation is the root of all heartache. And I think it's really true when it comes to product experiences. You may have made a product which is great, which exceeds your expectations. The question is, does it match the expectations that consumers have of your product? And I think there are a few things to think about. First, the context in which your product is being used actually in the real world. Does that match with what you had in mind? Or is something changing versus what you did in a lab or in your office or in your prototype testing? That's the first thing. Second, how immersed were you in how, where, and when your product will actually be used? So the actual use case of your product, how much does it actually match with what you had in mind? And the final piece is, what are some critical signals of performance your consumer has, which you can anticipate and build into that product experience? So I'll talk about and one of the examples I was talking about earlier, in my previous organization at General Mills, we were entering the snacking market. So in India, the snacking market broadly had two layers. One is all the cookies, brands all of us use in our households: Oreo, Bourbon, Dark Fantasy. Cookies in India, the advantage is they're single serve, you can pick them up, they're affordable, and they're usually all crunchy. On the other hand, you have cakes, which are delightful, soft, more multisensory. They might have something inside them, on top of them, seen as a bit of an occasional treat. What we were struggling with is, we will not succeed just by launching another cookie or cake. How do we differentiate ourselves? As we exposed a lot of products to consumers, we found magic in this product, which I talked about earlier, which looked like a cookie. It was bite-sized. A kid could have it for tiffin. It had a lot of decoration. It had chocolate layering on top. It had chocolate chips in between. It was soft and moist like a cake. So when we gave it to consumers, they basically said, this is like nothing I've tasted before. Kids loved it. Kids said, this is the best snack I've ever had. Parents said, look, this is amazing. My kids love it, but what is it? And that was the barrier we had, which is the product is amazing. The expectation of use. So our consumers were telling us, what is it? Is it a cookie? Is it a cake? And that was the dilemma we were dealing with. Like, even if we think about how do we market this thing? We have this amazing product. It can actually do the job of both a cookie or a cake. What do we call it? When we first started just calling it a cookie, in our research, consumers came and said, no, but cookies are different. Cookies are hard, but this is soft. When we just called it a cake, they said, hey, a cake comes in a bigger slice, which we can share. So it's a wonderful product, but it doesn't exactly match what I expect of these categories. So this was a classic case I saw where we had an amazing product. It's the expectations you're setting. So what we did is we took all those learnings and we said, let's give consumers what they are actually playing back. So we actually called it a cookie cake. It's straddling two categories, and we said, cake ka maza cookie mein, which is, hey, it looks like a cookie. It's affordable. You can buy a packet 10 rupees, but you're getting some of the fun of a cake, which is the softness, the multisensory delight. So I think this is one example where I learned that step one is having a product that delights your consumer. Step two is understanding where it fits into their regimen, their use case, how you can set the expectations for where it might actually delight them. Talking about the third moment of truth, which is, I talked about, is word of mouth. It's what consumers are talking about your brand. Just a few things to think about here. One is, I'd say very traditional, old-fashioned way of thinking about this is, my consumers will use my product and give me feedback, or I will go back and ask for feedback. I think the biggest insight I would leave you with is look at feedback as an always on conversation. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that, but really think of it as ideally the best marketers, the best product managers are people who are not waiting for occasional surveys. They are people who are trying to, on an always on basis, find out how their consumers are viewing their brands and products, what trends are happening, what may be shaping their expectations, and how they can continue to pivot and react. And I'd say the final piece I'd say is the reality is no consumer uses your product in isolation. All of us have lives beyond the products we use, right? If you're selling a product in a B2B use context, they have other levers of their business. So, coming back to the whole bakery analogy, we may be selling cake mixes to bakeries and our cake mix may be the best in the world. If the economy is in recession, if people aren't spending, if there's significant disruption, they have other things on their mind that are shaping how they view choices. And it's the same with consumers. There are things happening around us that are shaping how we view expectations of products, what categories we are interested in or not, and how do we think of that instead of thinking of it really narrowly in terms of I have a product to sell or a service to sell, and how do I engage with consumers on that? So, a couple of stories on that. The first one I'll talk about a little bit is on the whole always on context. So this is, today in the day and age of e-commerce, if I look at many categories, and, in the business I currently run, one of our biggest brands is Huggies and baby care. The wonderful thing with e-commerce and social media is you don't need to wait to get feedback. Consumers are giving you feedback every single day, often hundreds of times a day through the reviews they live. And what many companies are doing now is they are really starting to put much more method and science to this, which is actually looking at mining feedback left on e-commerce sites, comments left on social media, putting in place AI tools to really understand what are trends I'm spotting. So it becomes less about I will react to positive or negative feedback, but to really start spotting trends on what are leading indicators of the people giving me 5 and 4 stars. What are the things they tend to talk about? Those are clearly the delighters. Of the people giving me 1 and 2 stars, what are the things they talk about? So I can anticipate and catch and fix those issues before they become a big issue. And I think this is true of e-commerce, but to be honest, it's true even in an old-fashioned context when you're walking the beat, selling cake mixes to bakeries. Don't just go once in a year and get an idea of satisfaction. Every single time you meet them, understand what's going well, what can be better, what are they seeing around them that might be working better for them than your choice. But it's really a mindset of saying it's continuous improvement, it's always on feedback, which you can then keep shaping. Expectations are the third moment of truth, and also understanding early warning signs as well as early delight signs that you can either amplify if you find something people really like, or you can quickly pivot and fix if there are issues that are emerging. The second example I'll talk about is, it sounds like the two have nothing to do with each other, which is what we do on cake mixes versus the role of women in Saudi society. So this is from an assignment I did a few years ago. I was heading up our India and Middle East business in General Mills. In the Middle East, our biggest brand was Betty Crocker. And some of you may know the brand, may use the brand, but in Saudi Arabia in particular, it's a brand with huge heritage. It's been there for over 50 years. Many households have it as a part of their daily routine where they're making cakes made out of Betty Crocker, and having it as breakfast or snacks. And it's become almost a part of their daily routine. And, it was almost the mom felt a huge amount of emotional connection in terms of making this for her family. Now, over the last few years, Saudi society has been changing. So simple things. Women were not allowed to go out without a male companion. Women were not allowed to drive without a male companion. With the economy struggling, many more women are coming into the workforce, and the government there is actually encouraging that. So a few years ago, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, what we found is a lot of things were happening around us in society. And as we started meeting consumers, they started telling us, I'm finding a lot of new stresses and strains in my life. On the one hand, I am thrilled that now I hear I'll be allowed to drive and go by myself and have more of a life of my own. I'm thrilled that I may actually have more independence. I'm happy that I'll be able to participate in the workforce more actively and contribute. The stress point is, look, there are things I do for my family which are really important. And how do I continue to do that so that my kids don't feel like I am missing? So no consumer told us make me a different cake mix. But when we connected the two dots, which is on the one hand, there is a huge positive wave of women being given much more freedom, women getting much more empowerment. On the other hand, women have this dilemma of how do I continue to play all the roles that are expected of me? uh, when we took it down to our product, our cake mix is fantastic. The reality is it takes a lot of time to make. You have to mix the ingredients, stir it, put it in an oven for 40 minutes, let it cool, and then you serve it to your kids. The whole process takes time. If you're a woman who's used to doing that every day, every couple of days, and sometimes as it happened in Saudi Arabia, that's a lot of strain to put on yourself. So we came up with a new product which said, look, we're going to give you a pack where you mix it, you put it in a microwave, and in a minute you have a cake ready, a single serve, which you can serve your kids. What we also did in parallel is we launched a campaign where we said, look, we understand you're going through changes. We want to be a partner in that change. So we are celebrating what's happening in your life. You can continue to provide that loving snack you wanted to your family. And we also sponsored the first few licenses that were actually issued to women. So we took something that was happening much more broadly around the consumer's life, but then connected the dots to what might it mean for our product. And a reactive stance would have been wait a few years, we see category declining because people don't have enough time, and then you try and figure out why aren't people using our product as much. Now, coming to the zero moment of truth, which is, even before your product gets in front of your consumer, how is your consumer seeking out information? And, we talked about it simplistically on, the consumer Googles. The reality is consumers seek out information in many different ways. And no matter what product you're trying to market or sell or service you're trying to market or sell, I think the first two big questions to ask yourself is, who does your consumer turn to for information and who does your consumer trust the most? If you know that and you can influence that, you are setting yourself up for really winning because you're getting positive predispositions about your product even before the consumer is necessarily choosing whether to buy you or not. And the last part is, how are you engaging and shaping that preference even before she needs your product? And, I think this is, for me, the ultimate torture test. I mean, I'd say it's virtually table stakes if you say, look, I have a great product and I'm making myself available when my consumer needs it. Hopefully she chooses me because I'm meeting her need. I'd say it's a bit better to say, look, I understand who influences them and I'm trying to build that in. I think the ideal is when you're actually shaping preference even before your consumer is thinking of using your product, because you know what's on their mind, where they're seeking information, what are trustworthy sources of information or influence that he or she uses. So I'll give you a couple of examples. This is early on in my career. As I mentioned, we had just launched Pantene in India. It was the world's #1 hair care product at the time. New launch in India. And, the challenges are, whenever you're starting from zero, it's difficult, whether you're a big company launching into a completely new market or category, or indeed if you're a startup. The burden of proof is on you. Somebody is already there meeting that need. And the challenge is, how do you get yourself even established as a credible alternative? And what we found is, of course, consumers would see our advertising, they'd be interested, they'd see us in store. We were a completely new brand. Nobody had heard of us before. And we found, especially in big cities, a lot of our consumers would ask their hairstylists, which is, hey, I mean, which shampoo should I use? Or, I've heard of this new brand, how is it? And we realized we were probably missing out on a lot of consumers because the hairstylist would say, look, I have never tried it, or I don't really know how good it is, or yeah, but I'm not sure, why I quite like the shampoo I'm using now. So what that led us to do, this was actually one of my first projects in my career, was how do you then create a program which really goes and engages the stylists? Not just the end consumer, but the stylist, so that she starts to appreciate what our product is about. She understands our credentials. She starts trusting us so that the next time a consumer comes and says, hey, how's Pantene? She'll say, hey, it's a wonderful product. I've used it myself. Or at a very least, she says, look, I think it's a great product. You can try it. So that, I think, is a example of, how you could really think of the zero moment of truth. And if I, in a B2B example, what often worked is, industry associations. If you're really targeting bakers who are running bakery cafes and chains, they would get together in their own association and talk about industry trends, what's working, what's not working. That became a big lever for us, is how do we become a part of that? How do we become a part of key events where we're not necessarily selling our product, but we are seen as a credible source of information, thought leadership, understanding what issues they have, where manufacturers could help make a difference, which then starts getting them thinking of us much more positively than just our salesperson showing up at the store saying, here's a product, would you want to buy it for your cafe or bakery? And the other example I'll give is, again, even in the world of e-commerce, uh, consumers look at different e-commerce sites in different ways. So I'll stick with the diapers example I gave. Amazon is where a lot of people go to buy, and what a lot of manufacturers, including us, do is look, how do we provide great value, assortment, come up with differentiated ideas. On the other hand, First Cry is relatively smaller, but it's not just about e-commerce. It's a site where a lot of parents go for information. When you're expecting a child, a lot of parents go there and actually seek out information on how to best prepare for parenthood, how to take care of their babies. So that's a place where we say, look, that's an important zero moment of truth for us. And how do we show up there as actually providing information? It's not just about selling, but actually providing information about taking care of babies, so that we are becoming a part of that journey as they are starting to frame how they think about the category and how they think about the products they would want. So that was, really on the moments of truth. And, I think we'll have a decent amount of time for questions if you had them. I can see a few of them in the Q&A tab. What I would say is, those are all principles, frameworks, which, we can talk more about. What I've also found is there are some good habits to have that actually lead you to do things like these more often than not. To be realistic, I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes in my career as well. But if you adopt certain good habits, chances are more often than not, you're going to get it right. And for me, these good habits are: learn where your consumer lives, shops, and experiences your product, not at your desk. So, as I said, I've been working in the corporate sector for 25 years. I have never had a cabin or a room. And my belief always has been, if I'm in a consumer facing industry, all my time needs to be with people who are serving consumers, or with consumers, or where consumers shop. So I actually spend very little now. Obviously, with the COVID lockdown, it's a slightly different context. But in a normal office day, I'd spend very little time at a desk or in an office. A lot of it would be spent with consumers, in stores, with teams who are actually the front line of consumers. And no matter what you do, what kind of product you're developing, whether it's a software product or a service, ask yourself, how much time are you spending learning in the actual context where your consumer or customer lives, shops, and experiences your product, not at your desk or in a lab where you're developing it. I'd say the other thing is, understand what's happening in your consumer's life beyond your product. We talked about it, in terms of the macro environment. We've all been living through it in the last few months. All of us have been impacted in many ways through what's going on with the pandemic. But it's not just the pandemic. What are broader trends which have nothing to do with your product, which might be shaping expectations, which might be shaping how they view different products, which might be shaping features or benefits that become important to consumers, which were not important earlier. And I think the more broadly you can understand the consumer or the industry you serve, the more you're likely to make those connections, versus seeing your role in a very unidimensional way as, I'm a product manager or I am developer. Is really be curious and understand what is happening beyond and connect the dots. The third thing I'd say is, be curious about who else is delighting your consumer. Again, your competition may be other manufacturers or other service providers, but who is delighting the consumer may be someone completely different. So, I talked about the example about the salon and the treatment pack. We were not competing with salons. We were not in the salon business, but understanding what delighted them, what were the cues, visual, otherwise, that delighted them. helped us make a big leap versus where we were. And I think that's true no matter what industry we're in is. There's always inspiration out there if you're not thinking product first, but you're thinking what is actually evoking strong reactions in my consumers and what can I learn from them. Linked to that, I'd say the fourth is, bring diverse experiences and thinking into your team. The danger in any team is all of us are human beings. All of us are conditioned by our experiences, our inherent strengths, our inherent weaknesses. The more you have people who bring in very diverse mindsets, the more you're likely to understand, what's happening in the consumer's life, the more you're likely to understand what else consumers may be delighted by. That's one of the things I've really found to be of immense interest is get people who can see things differently, who are connecting dots differently from yourself and from other team members. And the final piece I'd say is always challenge the status quo, because ultimately, as we talked, it's not about a static definition of consumer delight. Consumers are changing, the environment they're using products in are changing, your competitive set is changing. Don't think of consumer delight as something which you say, I have arrived, I have a product that delights consumers, mission accomplished. But it's a journey of continuous improvement. I mean, all the things we talked about, to actually delight consumers, you need to be doing that on almost a continuous loop, which is continue to ask yourself, hey, so where is my consumer seeking information? What is the first moment of truth? What are their expectations? What is shaping their expectations? What are they talking about? What are other brands and products that might be inspiring them? This is not a one-time exercise. I think if you really want to be set up for success on a sustainable basis, this is I'd say, a continuous obsession where you're continually learning, continually refreshing. Some answers change, some answers may not change in the short term, but continuing to understand and iterate so that you can continue to get better. So, that's pretty much all I had in terms of the content. I'd love to, have some time for questions and answers, reactions, thoughts. But, I don't know honestly if what I had to share resonated with you. As I said, I come from a very different industry. And, I don't even know the content of what most of you do and the specific context in which you might be thinking of these answers. But, there's a quote I found which is interesting is, I at least hope you weren't bored. I hope, even if it was a waste of time, I hope it was an enjoyable waste of time in that you maybe got a couple of new things to think about, which maybe you take away and think about and find application back to what you do. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure having the opportunity to share this with you. And, I'll stop here and I'd love, Ankita and team, if there were any questions, to pick them up and have a dialogue around that.
Thank you so much, Menak. Let's open up for the Q&A session. The first question is by Kumar. He's asking, how do we influence brand loyalty? For example, my target enterprise customer loves Microsoft Cloud. How do I sell Alibaba Cloud to that customer, get them to shift loyalties to a competition they are hostile to?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. Now, to be absolutely honest, Kumar, I know nothing of the context of the specifics of, why they love and why they're hostile. But I think that's the root of what I would seek to understand. In any situation, where your customer is deeply entrenched with some other product or service and you're trying to break in, is really understand a double and triple click on the why. Why are they so loyal? Why are they not willing to consider another option? Why do they feel so strongly about it? And you might find that sometimes that answer has got to do with more than just the product. It may have to do with confidence, it may have to do with service, it may have to do with trust. And as you think back to the moments of truth, what are those third moment of truth that are shaping those opinions? So, your customer, where are they getting information from that might be predisposing them to a certain brand and versus your brand? So I would kind of think of that, because it's not as simple as going back to that customer again and again and saying, try me, I'm better. Because the barrier may not actually be, I don't believe you're better or you're not better. The barriers may be something completely different. So I would really penetrate the why behind that, figure out what's influencing that. Are there key influencers? Are there key sources of information that are predisposing them in a certain way? and attack those.
Thanks, Menak. There is a question by Amit wherein he's asking to go to a previous slide. Amit, can you help us which slide you are referring to so that your question is being answered? And audience, I request you to start asking questions. We have already opened up for the Q&A round. All right, Menak, you were talking about initially there was a lot of consumers and customers, they were coming from the word of mouth. So how things have changed now? Is it the same or the bar has increased? What are the changes you have seen?
See, I think the biggest change that's happened, Ankita, when it comes to word of mouth is nowadays it's real time and it's completely transparent. So if you think of, 25 years ago, consumer uses a product, doesn't like it, tells a friend, maybe the friend does something with it or not. It takes time and it's not visible. Today, a consumer uses a product and doesn't like it and puts a review out on an e-commerce site or a comment out on social media. It's instant feedback and it's out there. It's visible for everyone. I think that's the biggest change that's happened. I actually think it's a very positive change because it puts a lot of power back in the consumer's hand, because it's really about you have an equal voice. It's not just about manufacturers and service providers selling to you, and you don't really have a voice. I think it's a wonderful development, and I think the onus then becomes on industry to say how can you proactively solicit that reaction and feedback, embrace it, and react positively to it. So I think that's the biggest change I have seen. I'm actually seeing another question here.
Yeah.
Software.
Shall I read out for you,
Yes,
Menak?
yes, please. Yes.
All right, so this question is by Kaushik. He's asking, we are into software development for our clients globally, but in this pandemic, they are also facing trouble while committing for project continuation. We need more reach at this moment. Do you have any suggestion on how we can promote our brand globally so we do not have tangible products?
Sure. No, I think, Kaushik, that's a very, very good question. And I think the reality is, many industries are facing that today. Many of our consumers' lives, whether we are in FMCG or in services, are changing because of what's happening with the pandemic. Again, I don't know the specifics of, your business or what kind of software you develop. But one of the thoughts I'd have is when your customers are going through the kind of change all of us are going through and the challenges we are facing, one thought for you is how can you show up as somebody who is empathetic to that and is coming up with solutions which help meet some of the needs that are unique to what we're all facing in the pandemic. So again, for me, it would start with what are the issues they are facing that are coming up due to the pandemic? How can you understand those? And they may not necessarily be related to your software or your service. And then how can you pitch yourself as somebody who is addressing some of that, if even if in a small way, saying that we understand the issues you're facing, we understand the challenges you have, and here is how we are able to customize or tweak to help support you during this time. And I think a lot of organizations are facing similar challenges today. So if I think about the FMCG business, in the early days of the lockdown, it was complete chaos because you had the large areas of the country where people couldn't go to stores, e-commerce deliveries were blocked, modern trade outlets were closed, and especially when it came to necessities, essential products which consumers are using every day. The challenge is, consumers need these products and you need to get it to them. And that's where a lot of companies started innovative ways, which, can they partner with last mile delivery partners, like a Swiggy, for example. And that was an innovation that came completely as a result of the pandemic, where there was a consumer need, but I think manufacturers and producers realize, look, there is a unique dynamic going on, and how can we tailor what we offer and how we offer to recognize that. So Kaushik, I would say maybe think about what are some of the issues your clients or prospective clients are facing. How can you show up as somebody who, even if in a small way, can show up as understanding those challenges and helping address them.
Thanks, Menak. There is another question by Santosh. He's asking, customers have many touch points nowadays to their disposal. So it's a catch me if you can situation. How did you manage this challenge for your products? Any experiences to share?
No, it's a very good question, Santosh. And I'd say, to be absolutely honest, I talked about the 4 moments of truth. The reality is, you don't have to do all 4 of them brilliantly at the same time. They're not all equally important. I think the starting point is to understand, for where your brand is or your business is, what is really going to unlock your growth. So we talked a little bit about people might be aware, they may be aware but not willing to try you. They may try you, but you may not be meeting their expectations, or they might be hearing negative perceptions about you. I think the starting point is to really understand where you are and what is that biggest barrier you are facing. So if I take an example of, I talked about that chemist issue in Australia on Vicks. The brand is well known. Everyone knows Vicks. Everyone trusts Vicks. So we didn't need to work too much on that touch point. The issue was, for certain product lines, to really get to our consumer, we had to win much more convincingly in the chemist. So that was the specific touch point which we then zeroed in on. If I think differently of Pantene, when we launched in India, we had no credibility. First time the brand was launching, nobody had heard of us. So we had to start really, I'd say, at the earlier part of the funnel, really just establishing the credibility. Who are people seeking information from, establishing what the brand stands for. So I think a lot depends on where your business is at in this place, what your barriers are. So if I go back to the question Kumar had asked, chances are his customers know about the solution he's selling, Alibaba Cloud solution, but they are using something and they are in love with it and they don't want to shift. So you probably don't want to keep driving awareness, but you want to go and address that barrier. And that may stem either from what other benefits do they see in using that brand, what might be influencing them. So I'd say it's contextual, but really understanding along the moments of truth and along that journey where your business is and where you really need to intervene to unlock your potential.
Thanks, Menak. Any closing thoughts or anything which is there in your mind that you would like to share, or with the audience, or anything you would want to compare with the FMCG and the software product industry? Anything?
Well, see, what I would say is, I cannot comment on the software product industry, but what I would say is, ultimately, I think the principles are not very dissimilar. So I don't work in the software product industry, but we are all consumers. We are all consumers of various services and products that we're using every day. And I think the basic principle that I would like to leave behind with all of you is, no matter what service you're selling, what product you're selling, ultimately, I think success starts when you start walking in your consumer shoes. You start putting yourself in their shoes and understanding what leads them to make choices, what they are seeking, versus looking at it purely from your point of view of, I need to sell something to them. I think magic happens when you actually start doing that, putting yourself in their place, understanding what's driving their choices, motivations. I think that then starts unlocking answers to many of these questions, like which touch point do you focus on? There are external issues going on in their life. Then what, understanding what impact that has on them, and then coming back and saying, how do I best meet them? So I think, independent of the industry, I think that's a mindset which I think, if you're in any consumer facing industry, it's a mindset which I think is really helpful to keep.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Menak. And any further questions, queries, audience, do you have? All right, all right. Thank you so much, Menak, for this wonderful session. Learning from the FMCG sector has always been great and can be implemented in the software product industry. Absolutely, like rightly you said, a journey of continuous improvement. For everyone, there's been an announcement that NASSCOM Product Conclave, India's largest product event, is happening in the month of January from 11 to 13th Jan. Please log into the website and register to attend the amazing sessions. I am just sharing the website details over the chat box. I request you to please come and attend and register. And we have so many marquee speakers like Marty Kagan, Anil Bhusri, Arundhati Bhattacharya, and so on and so forth. They're coming and they'll be participating. So looking forward for your presence out there. And thank you so much, Menak, for your time and efforts. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure chatting